It is a very, very big pleasure to introduce our guest tonight. They used to call Gene Roddenberry the great bird of the galaxy, but this is a very, very big bird in the galaxy, I tell you. He has been with Star Trek since 1990 and has written over 100 hours of Star Trek in various locations. He is the executive producer and co-creator of Enterprise and is a Hugo winner. A Hugo winner, which requires absolutely nothing else to be very, very respectable indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest, Mr. Brandon Braga. Also, co-writer on Mission Impossible 2, which keeps alive that brotherhood that started way back at Desilu.
That's right.
Yeah, let's take a seat. The procedure is, of course, to ask folks to look for, here we ask, what do you want the audience to be looking for here? What do you want to sort of preload them to look for on the screen?
Well, I was kind of hoping we could get the Lakers game here. They're down by 10, by the way.
We'll update you after the film.
At halftime. Thrilled to be here. Thrilled that you guys are here. How many, I can't see anybody, of course, but how many people have not seen this movie? Has anybody not seen this movie? 3 people.
4 or 5.
Wow. I just watched the movie again. It's been 8 years since it was released. It holds up pretty well, I think. It turned out to be the highest grossing Star Trek movie, and it was very popular. A lot of people have asked me over the years, why do I think this was the most popular Star Trek film? And aside from The Next Generation Crew, which was really, really popular at the time it came out, I would say the Borg made it popular. But I also think it was the fact that this film was more accessible to a wider audience. You know, when we first conceived this film, Ron Moore, Rick Berman, and myself, we were going to set the Borg invading medieval times. So it was going to be like the Borg in, the bubonic plague, village. And Patrick Stewart said, "I don't want to wear tights," which is true. And we agreed. And we mulled over what time period we should set this movie in. And what we eventually landed on was, let's set it at the time that Star Trek was born, which is to say the landing of the 3 wise men, or the Vulcans at the end of the movie. I'm sorry to spoil it for you 3 people there. And really just kind of set it in a post-apocalyptic near future that would be more relatable to a general audience, and that people who maybe weren't familiar with Star Trek could appreciate what Star Trek was all about. And we created this character, Lily, played by Alfre Woodard, who knew nothing about Star Trek because she knows nothing of the future. So we could use her as a point-of-view character to kind of introduce a wider audience to what Star Trek is all about and the philosophy of Star Trek and what it means. And I think that kind of struck a chord.
There's a line that you hear over and over again in this film, 3-4 times. And I want to ask if this is from you or from your director here, but it's the phrase, "We haven't got time for this," and cut to the chase. And I think it's indicative of one of the reasons why this is such a successful film, is that it doesn't lag ever. That's one of the great things about it, and you just keep it moving. And I think, was that philosophical, that you just wanted to make sure that everybody understands, we haven't got time for this, let's just move on?
That was actually a mistake, repeating that line. No, we didn't design the film to be fast-paced per se, but we did design it with a 3-pronged storyline that we could intercut with. And that definitely gave it a buoyancy, I think. I was, before coming here, contemplating interesting tidbits to share with you. I have none. The only one, the movie has a nice sweep to it, and it feels like an epic, Borg battle film. But in fact, creating these individual Borg was very expensive. and we could only afford 8 Borg. So really, though it looks like there are a lot of Borg running around, there are only 8 dudes. And then the rest are dummies that our makeup artist Michael Westmore created, and he kind of placed in all the Borg alcoves. And we kind of used that template of 8 Borg for years to come on Voyager, which really expanded upon the Borg mythos. When this movie came out, of course, the Borg had only been seen fleetingly on Star Trek Next Generation. And it was one of the reasons I think people really flocked to see this movie. We exploited the Borg ad nauseum in the years thereafter, but they never looked better than they looked here.
So for the Borg's finest hour, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy Star Trek First Contact. We'll see you after. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back our very special guest, Mr. Brennan Braga.
How many people have to pee real bad?
Which is the first time it was mentioned in Star Trek. We were just talking about this. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is the very end, where the alien is coming down, and all the people who are gathered around watching and they're having a close encounter. And the hood comes back, and those who hadn't already figured out realize, my God, it's a Vulcan. And if there's anything we know, it's Vulcan. So the audience or the people on the scene are still dealing with aliens, but if the audience at home knows or the audience in the theater knows, home free. We can deal with these guys. I mean, that was structured that way, right? That was what you had in mind.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to. I mean, it was an historic moment in Star Trek, I guess, that had never been depicted. How did humanity make? In Gene Roddenberry's universe, they've achieved a paradise on Earth. How did they make that turn? What happened to make that occur? And we just kind of concocted this warp flight and the landing of the Vulcans and extraterrestrials changing the landscape of humanity on Earth. And it seemed to strike a chord. Seemed to be right.
Had you worked on the episode First Contact on the Next Generation?
I didn't write it, but I was there when it was being done.
Because it does resonate with it some way, knowing that's a dicey situation, in this universe, the idea of the First Contact.
Yeah.
It just seems interesting, and maybe you can get the story in there as to why this was called First Contact, even though there was an episode called First Contact. Were there other titles in mind?
Well, sure. We thought about calling it Star Trek Borg. We thought of all kinds of things, but because the title was used in episode 113, very few people like yourself would actually would remember that. But I don't think people really remember. I don't think they remember titles. I don't think so. Do they? I don't know.
Yeah, I think they do.
But it was okay.
Well, let me ask. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me ask about the circumstances going into this. What were you needing to do with this particular film? Now, obviously, this is the first one that didn't have the original cast, and it was the Next Generation going out on their own on the feature. So we understand those things, but what does that add up to when it comes time to actually start putting a story together and starting to put a film together?
Well, when we started, all we really knew is that we wanted to do something with the Borg, because we felt the Borg. We knew the Borg were really, really popular on Next Generation. And we knew we wanted to incorporate time travel, which was also a popular element. But we couldn't really figure out, we danced around a lot of different ideas about what time period to put it in. And we were really fortunate that this idea came along to put it in the near future and make it about the birth of Star Trek itself. And what's at stake in this movie really is Star Trek. If those Vulcans don't land, the universe the audience has come to know and love will not exist. So it really turned into something a little more interesting as that storyline developed. And we had the Borg for a while, just as the Borg. And I remember Jonathan Dolgen, who was the chairman of Viacom at the time, said to Ron, Rick, and myself, you need a voice for the Borg. Otherwise, they're just these automatons. And we said, yeah, well, that worked for the series. And he said, yeah, but this is a movie. You need a voice. And we thought, oh, God, what are we going to do? And so we came up with the idea of the Borg Queen, which really brought a lot to the movie. And then the Data becoming more human arc was born. And then the third element of the film that came along was this idea of the great Zefram Cochrane, who is referenced and I think even depicted in the original series, right? Mm. And we thought it was interesting to have this crew meet Zefram Cochrane, but he is not anything like anybody thinks. He's a drunk, and he's kind of the antithesis of Gene Roddenberry's ideals, and kind of depict how he got to be where he is by the end of the pictures, thanks to these heroes. So a lot of elements came together to make it what it is.
All right, let's talk about casting. I don't know how much you were involved in the casting on it. I mean, obviously you had your original cast, but how did you get Alice Krieger, by the way, who's wonderful in this? Superb.
Well, I know they read a lot of people for the role, but Krieger's name was a name that we had bantied about early on. Rick Berman had seen her in a movie. What was the movie she made? Chariots of Fire, right? He liked her from that, and I really liked her from the movie Ghost Story, because she had a creepy sexiness in that movie that I thought was just perfect for the Borg Queen, who was kind of a kinky, weird character and was going to add a strange undercurrent of sensuality to the movie. So she was just perfect.
Well, I was going to get into that later, but let's get into it. This is the kinkiest of all the Star Trek films.
Yes, it is. Well, yeah.
And I mean, from the goosebump scene on.
Although I thought in Insurrection, when Data and the boy come out of the haystack, that was kind of kinky. I'm just teasing. Yeah, we wanted it to. We thought the Borg Queen should be a sensual character who was seducing Data with the prospect of flesh. And one of my favorite moments of the film is that little patch of skin she blows on, the blowjob, as it were.
I hadn't thought of it in those terms.
But and the little goosebumps that came up, I thought that was really cool.
Actually, that's a real memorable scene. That one sticks in your head, because it is so weird, and yet you can sort of identify with it, I guess, in some way or another.
Yeah, the Borg Queen's sexy. She's interesting.
This is a real sort of straightforward kind of universe. Were there eyebrows raised at this scene, or the implications thereof?
I don't think so. I thought there has always been an element of sensuality to some degree with Star Trek. And for instance, the moment in the film where Data says he's fully functional was in was the first season of Next Generation. So there's always been a playful sensuality in Star Trek.
With one of everyone's favorite episodes, as a matter of fact, Tasha Yar, et cetera, et cetera.
The second one they aired, yeah.
Was it the second one?
I think it was.
That early?
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, they got right to it then, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Yes, they did.
Well, you got to be proud of that. And James Cromwell.
Well, James Cromwell had been on Next Generation several times before. He was kind of a member of the Star Trek family. He played a character named Shrek in an episode called Birthright Part 2. Or was it Birthright Part 1? Both? Both, okay. And he had played some other aliens here and there, and he had just done the movie Babe. And he was just wonderful in that, and he agreed to do it, and he was perfect in the role.
Tell me about, in general, writing for this universe. A universe that you didn't set up necessarily, that has not strictures, but definitely has a structure that you really can't mess with. It has a tone. It has what Roddenberry established, this optimistic view of the future. Is that in ways liberating and in ways constricting when you write for
Well, this is just my opinion. There have been writers over the years who found it constricting, but I think constrictions are good when you're trying to write drama. I think you want parameters. And I personally love Gene's universe. And, I don't want to write for a show where people are at each other's throats. It's more interesting to do it metaphorically with the aliens they meet and so forth. Though we did find times when the characters could be in conflict, and here, for instance, with Picard and Worf. But no, it wasn't it's never been restricting, not at all.
I expected an answer something like that because, when you're writing in a genre, it's the genre itself. If you do it well, it helps you along. It gives you the ladder that you can, the scaffold.
And the Star Trek universe, there have been almost 700 episodes of Star Trek plus the movies. It's become its own universe, and it's anything but restrictive. There's so many things you can tap into that have been established, and it's anything else you can think of beyond that. So it's not at all restricting, I don't think.
Was it intended that Barclay's big copper device was similar to the one on Forbidden Planet? I read that somewhere, and I hadn't made the connection
I
myself.
have no idea. I have no idea. In fact, I was thinking about this movie. I was thinking, that's the one moment that wouldn't hold up as well, maybe, or with people who had not seen the movie might not know who that character is. So I was a little worried about that. I know nothing about his copper pipe.
Someone had said that there's a scene where they bring Robbie apart to reproduce, and it's exactly the same type of copper tubing. Looks like it might be out of a still, but they give it to Robbie to or something of that nature. But there's a scene that's a parallel to that in Forbidden Planet. I've seen it a few million times. I don't remember it.
Yeah,
but it was written down. I thought I'd make a reference to it. This might be a good time to ask the current state of Enterprise, which you're a co-creator of, an executive producer.
Starting a 4th season now. It's going great. We had a great season, in part thanks to a writer named Manny Cotto, who's right there in the audience. Manny? There he is. He wrote some great shows and has been instrumental in helping our 3rd season be so successful. We're starting a 4th season, and it's going really well. We have a lot of really exciting things in store. We're very happy to have been picked up.
How did First Contact influence the show Enterprise?
It's a good question. It did influence it to some degree in a purely theoretical way when we were discussing the show in its early stages. As I said earlier, First Contact seemed to appeal to a broader audience, as did Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, which was the 2nd most popular film, and my personal favorite. It appealed to a broader audience, had a sense of humor about it, had story elements that weren't entrenched in the Star Trek universe, and yet did appeal to longtime fans of the show. And in creating Enterprise, we wanted to do that essentially. Create a show that was accessible to people who didn't know the universe, and that it was a show about the very beginning of it, but at the same time could dip into elements that have been around a long time. So yeah, it's a really good question. We do look at our prior successes to try to create future successes, if possible.
Now, let's look into the idea of the Borg a little bit more, because it did immediately strike a chord on the series when Q introduced them early, if I recall correctly, and they hung much longer than you might have expected because they did work so well. What do you think it is about the Borg that caught the imagination of the audience?
They look cool, first of all. They're these scary, bionic zombie things, and they are so antithetical to our ideals, to be assimilated into one mind, eradicate individuality. I think that kind of strikes. All the good Star Trek villains have some motivation that's clearly defined and easily identifiable. And I think the Borg were definitely that. In the 700 episodes that have been done, it's not that often that the aliens are so distinguishable. Usually it's a dude with some bumps on his forehead. So when the Klingons, who were the first bumps, everyone remembered them, and then you get people like the Borg, you remember them because they're different and they're kind of scary, and it's one of those things that doesn't come along every day on the show.
How has writing for the Borg changed over the years?
Well, if you watch Star Trek Voyager, you were a Borg fan, you were really in for a treat, because we spent many, many episodes about the Borg and introduced a Borg character, 7 of 9, and really, I think, nicely evolved the whole Borg universe and really got under the skin of the Borg and showed different dimensions of the Borg. So how has it been writing over the years? It's just gotten more intricate. We've just had a lot of fun doing different things and showing different dimensions to the Borg. And of course, we brought the Borg Queen back several times, played by a different actress, and it was fun.
I was lucky enough to have been assigned to do a set visit on this film. It was one of the corridor days, and I got a chance to talk to Jonathan Frakes when he was working on this film. And the thing I remember most about that day was him sitting there watching, the video assist and jumping up several times and says, "We got to get these guys to move." And it seemed to be very important to him that he keep the motion of this headlong. He wanted to keep this film on its feet. Let me ask about, what was your reaction when you found out that it was likely that Jonathan was going to direct this, and how was your feeling in working with him as writer and director?
Well, I had worked with Jonathan for years on Next Generation, and he directed some great episodes of the show. So we were very happy. He knew the universe, and we were thrilled, and he did a great job. And in terms of people moving, he did give a great pace. Working with the Borg is not easy. My feeling was, if you get caught by the Borg, you deserve to be caught. I mean, they're just lumbering along. They're like the mummy.
Yeah, Mummy Caris, dragging one leg.
So that, and they don't have weapons. They just kind of swing their arms at you. How scary can they be? But he, to his credit, he really made it work.
And there's only 8 of them.
Yeah.
Was there something in the movie that you wish you could have explored further? Probably a half a dozen, but which comes to mind?
It's a good question. I haven't thought about that in a long time. It kind of ties into an earlier question. I think I was interested, we all were interested in exploring the Borg further and the origins of the Borg further, and who is this queen? She's never even really called the queen. She's just some lady. I think that would have been nice, but we ended up doing that. That's the great thing about a TV show, is you can, take a few dozen episodes and explore it further.
What was your inspiration for her? Was there something that sort of,
For the queen?
For the queen herself, yeah.
This is going to sound really... Well, first of all, the Borg queen. What more do you need to say? You can kind of imagine what that might be. This is going to sound funny, but there was this movie called Captain EO. You remember that? At Disneyland? All right, well, that was still running around the time we were conceiving this film. And Angelica Houston played this scary lady who lived in the ceiling and would descend on cables. And I just remember we liked it, and I remember discussing, that's a cool image for the Borg Queen. And we did a version of it. So Captain EO was a little bit of an inspiration. It's not there anymore.
It's a Coppola picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you shoot the exteriors? Where the Montana sequence?
Montana was shot at Mount Wilson, and it was freezing cold. Freezing cold, but every time the camera would stop rolling, people would grab parkas and run into a trailer. It was miserable weather. The Phoenix ship, the missile silo stuff, was filmed outside of Tucson, Arizona, and the ship inside, when you see the ship, it is an actual ICBM. And our production designer, Herman Zimmerman, did a great job of making it look like a spaceship. I thought that was really interesting. It was a neat location. An inactive ICBM.
That would have been very helpful, especially the idea of rock and roll in the future. I was delighted, when you played Magic Carpet Ride, Newbie Doobie was a Roy Orbison track. That's the pop culture never seems to make it into the Trek universe. It's difficult to put it in.
Well, it's rare that we have an opportunity. I would disagree to some extent. The holodeck always gave us a little bit of pop culture, but it just seemed like Zefram Cochrane's character to play a little bit of rock and roll.
Well, it was a good choice. And speaking of the holodeck episode, rumor has it that that if you watch very carefully among the extras in the holodeck episode, a now familiar face might show up. Weren't you in that sequence?
Oh, no, in this movie, yes.
Yeah.
For about a millisecond, yes. I'm actually at the far right side of the frame, which is a real drag because on cable and stuff, they don't do the letterbox, so I'm not in it at all. So it was really depressing.
You know, there's something that is, you know, being executive producer, you still can't help
catch
the
a
aspect
break.
ratio.
Yeah.
What were the shooting days like on this? Do you remember any of the circumstances of the production?
You know, like most films, long, you know, difficult, but so much of it was on a soundstage that it was, you know, containable. And so many people that worked on the movie, like Jonathan and a lot of the crew, had worked on the TV show for a long time, so they all knew each other, and it was very efficient. But it was hard work.
One of everybody's favorite scenes is seeing Marina Sirtis drunk. You know,
Right.
I mean, you know, how does she react to that?
Well, you know, it's interesting, and I only speak for myself. I don't speak for Ron Moore or Rick or anyone else involved in the film. I didn't like that scene, and I thought it should have been cut. And the reason is the film was bouncing along at that point, and Picard and everyone was, you know, they were getting their guns ready, and we're going to go fight the Borg, and you're just kind of like, okay. And then they cuts this rather long comic scene, and I didn't really think it was very funny, particularly. But did you guys like that scene, really?
Oh.
All right. Well, that's good to hear. I didn't like it, but I obviously didn't win the battle, so.
Actually, you know, it was an aspect of her personality you'd never seen before.
Yeah.
I appreciated it on that basis. Then it was you know, they're kind of starchy, these Star Trek guys, and you like to see the starch taken out of them
Absolutely.
once in a while. Is Q going to ever make a reappearance?
Don't know. I just don't know. We always talk about it. Q kind of got defanged over the years. You know, he was so great at the end of in the finale of Next Generation, and then he came back on Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and he was rather soft. So if we were to bring Q back, we would want to bring him back with an edge to him in some fashion. The right story has to come along, I guess, in other words.
Let me ask about where you see the Star Trek universe going. Obviously, we've got another season of Enterprise, and that's the sort of backing and filling in the history. But this is a franchise that's, my God, is it 30 years now, and 30 and change?
I think it's 38.
38. I was in junior high school when this thing started. So, but you know, where will it go now? Obviously, it's got a future. That's what it has.
You know, I take it a season at a time. I don't know, and it's really larger than me. You know, it's up to Paramount and a lot of other people where it's going to go. Whether it will take a rest, which frankly I think it probably should at some point. I just don't know. But we have one more year of Enterprise, maybe more. No plans for another film, as far as I know. Although there is a film in development right now at Paramount, come to think of it. But I don't know much about it. I'm not involved. I don't know. It's a dumb answer, but I really don't know.
I think that that Star Trek has very much, you know, paved the way for an awful lot of what we're seeing now, good and bad. But I think it's allowed, you know, the whole realm of science fiction to escape the idea of, you know, ray guns and space opera, and finally beginning to see some real science fiction. I mean, there's a version of iRobot coming on, Isaac Asimov. I don't think Isaac Asimov might necessarily recognize it entirely, but
Well, you know, I think in the world, my opinion has always been that science fiction in the realm of literature has always been really great science fiction, and that's been for a long, long time. But in mainstream, there haven't. Star Trek did. I mean, in television and movies, it did certainly help legitimize and add a certain gravitas to science fiction. Though I think there's still a bias against science fiction. Certainly by, you know, awards givers or whatever, although Next Generation was nominated for an Emmy once for Best Series, which was huge for a science fiction show. But I kind of feel there's a certain bias against it.
But, I mean, it has given a certain legitimacy in mainstream terms, I think, to the entire...
It certainly helped. It certainly helped. But, you know, it seems that science fiction films have always been popular to some degree. I mean, one of the first movies ever made was a science fiction film. And if you look at the top 10 grossing movies of all time, half of them are probably science fiction films. So Star Trek certainly helped, but I don't think it was solely responsible.
Where do you think Star Trek has done its best work? You know, in terms of not only being entertaining, but of having something to say. Where do you think it's done its very best work?
You know,
Are you too close?
Probably, but I think the answer is kind of obvious. It's added a certain, again, gravitas, moral explorations, philosophy. It's explored some decent issues over the year and gone beyond aliens and ray beams and that kind of stuff. I think it is known for exploring issues in an interesting way, and perhaps that's what it's best known for, and maybe it's the best that it has to offer.
Well, I remember an episode that was one of Jonathan Frakes' big episodes, and I can't think of the name of it, but
The Outcast?
That's the one. As a matter of fact, I think that it deals with that issue in a Star Trek kind of way.
Yeah,
And I think that is real identifiable as Star
there
Trek.
have been a lot of episodes like that, I think, over the years.
That one comes to mind. There's others, of course. What's the best part about working on Star Trek? Where do you get your greatest amount of emotional feedback and satisfaction?
Well, it's really torturous work. I mean, after so many episodes and so many years, it's really hard to think up new ideas. But it's very satisfying when you do come up with the idea and you have an episode that really works, to see it finally come together and air. And now, of course, get on the internet and get all the feedback. Like the next, or as it's airing, you can get feedback. Sometimes before it's aired. Sometimes when you've just finished writing the script, it's on the internet. You know, it's satisfying for all the reasons you might expect. You know, it's a great franchise. It's popular worldwide. It's very satisfying to do something every now and then, to do a great episode and have it be appreciated is very satisfying.
Now, this is a dangerous area to get into in the presence of fans who are actually here, but the whole fan phenomenon for Star Trek is beyond, you know, almost any other franchise, any other show, any other anything. You know, is that a two-edged sword, or you know, how do you guys react to that?
My philosophy has always been better an obsessive interest than no interest. And see, you know, but you know, most Star Trek fans they don't dress up and go to conventions. But even if they do, you know, really, who cares? You know, the movie. If you haven't seen the movie Trekkies, it really is a good movie, and it really does kind of capture some of the fanaticism. But it's all in good fun. It's all in good fun, and our fans are very vocal.
Tell me about your writing process. You know, when do you do your writing? Get up early in the morning, you write at 3 o'clock in the morning, or what?
It depends on what kind of meetings I have during the day. I kind of grab, you know, a few hours where I can, but typically in the morning. Typically.
We were talking about we have to finish putting in all the good stuff about Enterprise. You're changing nights.
Yes.
That's good news. Is that good news?
I don't know. I don't know. That was the network's decision. I had nothing to do with it. I think it's good. I mean, right now we're up against American Idol, for crying out loud. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, basically might as well not even air the episodes. So Friday night will hopefully be a clearer night for us, and you know, I hope people watch. I don't know. They'll seek it out, I think.
14 years you've been with Star Trek?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite moment? Is there a moment when that has been better than all the others, as Goethe put it? You know, is the moment you wanted to hold on to? Has there been a favorite moment for you in this 14 years?
Well, I think one of the better moments was seeing the final episode of Next Generation come together, which Ron Moore and myself wrote in a daze, because we were writing Generations at the same time, the first Next Gen movie. In fact, we joked at how All Good Things, the episode, should have been the movie, because it would have made a better movie. But it was a blur, and we were really, really concerned that we would not do that great series justice. And it turned out so well, and the fan response over the years has been so enthusiastic and embracing that I think overall that's been one of the great experiences for me personally.
And that was the one you won the Hugo for, isn't that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, is what I was expecting.
Well, it's...
How do you feel about winning a Hugo? I guess that's a question I should ask.
It was an honor. It was an honor. It was great. It was great. I don't know.
I got him to say it was great. There we go.
No, I don't.